Okay, good morning. It looks like we have a really small group today. Excuse me. Um, so certainly we can customize the session to meet your needs. I am Donna Murray. Forgive me, I can't remember who's here today that was also able to join us yesterday. Yesterday was our first series webinar. Um, Basically an introduction to digital accessibility. And then this is part two of the six-part series, where we're going to be focused on internal assessment. How do we decide what our current landscape is in our organization when it comes to accessibility? So again, I'm Donna Murray. I serve as the Digital Accessibility Specialist at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. I have been in education for a little over 29 years. First as a classroom teacher, then at the district level, and then I've been at the state agency for 11 years now. So my focus over the last 10 years has been all things digital learning, with a really intense focus on all things digital content. So really around instructional materials, and have led the work in our state around open educational resources. And then over the past few years, my main focus has been around digital accessibility. And fortunately, the agency was able to devote some resources to creating a position, an office of one, for digital accessibility. And I was honored to transition into that role about almost a year and a half ago. So in this work, one of the things that I've realized time and time again is that we really aren't going to have the type of change and the push for accessibility that in the time frame that we really want it to happen without a true partnership between our organizations and our suppliers, our vendors. And that's really what drove me to develop this series, this webinar series. Now, I recognize, again, we've got a really small group today. I was telling the group yesterday, I sent out, I think, around 3,000 email invitations. So I'm hoping that this is just kind of the first iteration of this webinar series, and that some folks will also be able to access the recordings as we, as this is kind of an organic groundswell process to get folks engaged in the conversation. So I appreciate you guys being part of this first cohort of vendors who are interested in diving deep into this conversation. So since it is a small group, please feel free at any point to unmute, to interrupt. I'm a very casual presenter. You can interrupt, and we can pause and adjust as we need to the content today. Yesterday's session, hang on, before I forget, let me throw the link to the presentation into the chat. You don't have to pull it up. I'll be sharing links into the chat directly, but I would recommend that you save that bookmark, because there are a lot of embedded links that you might want to access later. The shortcut link is also on that first slide, go.ncdpi.gov/access vendors assessment. And let me apologize in advance. Yesterday's webinar had to be rescheduled from the week before because I had no voice. So I have been I'm on my third antibiotic in 5 weeks, and so I've got my cough drops and my drink nearby. But if I suddenly stop talking, just know that I've had a little coughing fit, and I'll be right back. So thanks for your grace with that. All right, so let's jump in. Today's session, again, is around really identifying the current landscape. Our next webinar will be focused on what do we do with that. So today is kind of the what. Tomorrow will be the so what and the now what. And then the remaining sessions are really going to be focused on some very specific topics, like how do I make sure that I'm really telling a good I'm giving enough detail, telling a good story about our current landscape and our plans moving forward in a conformance report. What do we do? What are some strategies for us to collaborate across organizations? Even though I am obviously all in this education landscape, there is a driving, well, a push towards accessibility because of the recent rule in 2024 around Americans with Disabilities Act, Title II. And so this webinar series and the invitation, I mentioned that the series is not just for suppliers of products for ed organizations, it's also for state and local government. So I was really kind of stepping back and providing this webinar series through that broader lens, because honestly, what's applicable to our ed organizations under ADA Title II is also applicable, equally so, and in the same scope for our state and local governments. So whatever your lens is, whoever your customer base is for your products, as long as it's fallen somewhere within state and local government, hopefully the resources that I share today will be beneficial to you. Okay, so let's jump in. We're going to talk about that. How do we define that current landscape? And I've mentioned in the webinar description that we're really going to be looking at a maturity model. So the intent today is to share some resources and some guidance to help you process and identify that current landscape so that then we can be well informed as we're making a game plan. So I did include a link to yesterday's presentation slides. I have not processed that video and created the transcript and captions, but when that is finalized, it will be posted on that same webpage where all of the information about this webinar series was shared. So I will follow up with an email specifically to attendees and those who registered. But please know that over time, once I get all of these webinars finalized and the recordings are ready to go, all of that will be posted on that website, so you can come back and access it anytime. But I went ahead and linked the slides in case you'd like to visit those, because we did talk about yesterday some content that we're not going to dive deep into today, and you might need that foundational knowledge before you get too deep in the weeds on making a game plan. So yesterday we talked about the ADA Title II. We talked about Section 504 and Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act and how that relates to digital accessibility. We briefly talked about the WCAG standards. I see new messages, so let me pull up the chat to make sure. Oh, thank you, Nicole, for sharing that. I did include that link that you shared yesterday. I did add that in the slide deck. So thank you for sharing another resource. So we also talked about just the POUR framework, about really what are our intentions when we're saying that we need stuff to be accessible. We need it to be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And the WCAG standards, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, that's the bar that we need to meet under this new rule. And those standards are chunked according to the POUR framework. So it really kind of helps us identify the big pieces. What are we trying to do here? We're trying to make sure that people can navigate content, that it's understandable, that it's accessible with assistive technologies and keyboard accessible and so on. And so we briefly kind of dug into that yesterday with a few strategies. And we did talk briefly about like the current landscape of accessibility in the world. So we looked at a report that shares some kind of the number of errors on the top 1 million websites, and found that this is inaccessibility is a wide landscape. There's a lot of digital content that is just not designed to be accessible. And so this is not just specific to state and local governments, and it's not even specific to commercial products. This is across government, commercial, nonprofit, you name the space. If there's a digital space for it, then most likely there's some accessibility issues embedded in there. So We briefly talked about roles and responsibilities. We'll dig deeper into that a little bit more next in the next webinar. And then we talked about why it matters. Like, what is the ROI for you as a vendor? So I encourage you, once I get that recording posted, I encourage you to take a look at that. And of course, you've got the slides here. Okay. So before we jump in today, just a few kind of to preface our conversation, I've just made a few points I wanted to make sure that I covered. One, again, this is about just setting the baseline, identifying where we are as an organization. The next one will be about taking that information and using that to inform the development of our plan or the revision. You may already have a plan around accessibility, and if so, that's fantastic. This could be an opportunity for you to revisit that, kind of get a pulse of where you are, and then use that information to inform any revisions to your plan. And I put in here that organizations vary greatly, and I think that's an important piece to elevate in this conversation, because as we're going through a lot of the maturity model that I've built out, this self-assessment that I've created, you may be able to answer all of those questions today. It may be that your company is so large that there's so many moving pieces and so many large teams embedded in the structure of your company that this is really going to take some time and some conversation with those teams to determine the current landscape. So I encourage you to take anything that I create, anything that I share, I encourage you to take it, remix it, repurpose it to suit your needs. The self-assessment that I'm going to share with you today is something that I created with the intent that it's going to drive internal planning and conversation. So don't think that this has to be a static resource that it either fits or it doesn't. Take it, remix it, tear it apart, build it back together, whatever suits the needs of your team. Knowing that all of our vendor landscape is just very much like our school districts. It varies tremendously from one to the next, and how it's structured, what the priorities are and the vision, what products are developed, and just the whole inner workings of that organization. So again, take it. It's what's mine is yours. The intent here is that we are going to grow together in improving accessibility. All right, so that's my soapbox on that. Just a few acronyms, excuse me, that I just want to mention in case you're not familiar with them. The ADA is that Americans with Disabilities Act. The VPAT and the ACR go hand in hand. So if you're not familiar with the VPAT, that is kind of an industry standard template where we can, as a vendor, you can tell the story of the current state of compliance for the WCAG standards, those Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is the last acronym here. The VPAT is a template to help tell that story. How compliant are we? Do we support that standard? And then any additional explanation to tell the story of what features and functionality meet that standard versus the gaps, and then you could even include what's our game plan for addressing that. Now, the accessibility conformance report is really usually a completed VPAT. But I've noticed in all the years I've been working in this space that we still often call it a VPAT, even when it's finished. So the VPAT is the template, but it's kind of used interchangeably with an accessibility conformance report. Now, you may have your own conformance report template, but that you use to tell the story of your accessibility compliance. But usually the industry standard and oftentimes in procurement processes, the request is for a completed VPAT. So VPAT and ACR, again, are usually used interchangeably. And then I just mentioned the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. So if you weren't able to join yesterday and you're not familiar with the ADA Title II rule, I encourage you to check out those slides. It kind of gives you a quick overview. I've got a recorded webinar actually on my website where I do a deeper dive into the ADA Title II rule. Essentially, the rule has given clarification to the work. And what I mean by that is ADA has been around since 1990. And in 1996, the Department of Justice clarified that even though it doesn't have the word digital in it, it includes digital, because ensuring that our services, activities, and programs are accessible. Well, in 1990, that probably didn't include a lot of digital stuff, but it's 2025 now. And all along the way, we have exponentially increased the amount of digital content that we provide. Some of our program services and activities are completely through digital means. And other times, the information about them is available through digital means. So ADA has been around. We've been expected to ensure our digital content is accessible all along for decades now. But the rule itself from 2024 is giving us a bar to meet, and that's the WCAG standards. The specific version that we are required to meet is 2.1 level AA. There's an A, a double A, and a triple A, and we're having to at least meet that middle of the road. So while we're not going to dig too deep into the WCAG standards today, I just wanted you to be familiar with kind of where that's coming into play. It's built into that new rule as the technical requirement. So I appreciate the rule because it's giving us some clarification on what do we mean when we say that our content needs to be accessible. Okay, so let me throw a couple links into the chat. You folks are the very first to see the resources that I have developed. Forgive me, I'm obviously not able to multitask right this second. Hence, what I said earlier, the office of one means that I'm also navigating the webinars by myself. So I've put two links into the chat. One is the document that actually corresponds tremendously with the slide deck. So the slide deck is kind of the document in slide format, minus a few details. And then the corresponding spreadsheet is just the rubric itself. So the self-assessment rubric that I created that kind of lays out 10 different dimensions. And then, of course, a sliding scale of where you are currently, with the intent that routinely, I think internally you can decide how often, but routinely that you come back and revisit this to see what improvements you've made. And of course, this will inform the plan that we're going to be talking about in the next webinar. So I've included the links directly into the chat. You're welcome to just go under File and make a copy. But I also have direct copy links in the slide deck. So all that's going to do is force you to make a copy. So feel free, as we're talking today, if it suits and you want to go ahead and pull up that spreadsheet and kind of do a self-assessment individually, or if you've got teammates on the call, you guys can collaborate, or pull up, make a copy and share it with your teammates to have this kind of intro discussion around the current landscape of your organization. So again, you guys are the first to see this. I have been working on this maturity model for some time and have kind of a shorter version of this that I've created, a much shorter version that I've created for our ed organizations, for our public school units, our school districts, and our charter schools. That's really just to help them think through, do we have anything in place? Where are we starting from ground zero, or do we already have a few pieces in place when it comes to accessibility? And this is like that on steroids. So this is the beginning of a toolkit that I'm sharing publicly. It's not even posted on my website yet. So I'm hoping to wrap that up today and create a space where it's not just a few resources about procurement, but that this is a kind of a whole toolkit that we can share with suppliers. Okay. So again, feel free to pull that up, or you can just kind of follow along and process individually, whatever suits your needs today. If you're a small organization, again, you might be able to fill out that self-assessment as we're talking. But I encourage you to, especially if you're thinking about joining the webinar next week, if you have an opportunity to complete the self-assessment before then I think you'll have some action items that we could build out next week that you could take away. Certainly not a requirement. I think you can jump in next week, even if you didn't attend this session. But I think you could definitely maximize that time next week if you've already had an opportunity with your team to complete the self-assessment. Okay, so here are the dimensions that I feel like, based on experience and research, these are the dimensions that I think are important to not only our self-assessment, but to our plan. There's really not a need to read through these out loud to you right now because we're going to be diving into each one of these separately. But this is just kind of an overview of what those 10 dimensions are. And then the rubric itself. Now, if you have internal language for any other maturity models or self-assessments that you complete, again, feel free to take this and remix it however you like. But the way that I've structured the rubric is through the lens of 4 levels. One, that it's completely lacking. We just really haven't dipped our toe into this part of the work yet. So I've just labeled that as absent. There's really no, there might be some informal efforts moving forward or going on right now, but overall, we haven't started. Number 1 is just in that developing stage, so maybe more reactive. There's an accessibility issue that a user has brought to the table, and so we're going to see if we can address it. It's really just on again, kind of a reactive basis, and there's not really any clear structure to accessibility work. But the difference kind of that I've put between 2 and 3, established and embedded, is that established is we kind of have we have some processes in place. It's systematic in that, again, there's processes and we've got some roles and responsibilities that have been determined. But the difference between that, I think, and the 3 that's embedded is, I say embedded is, it's just how we do business. So it becomes more, it's so embedded into the culture and the processes of the organization that it's not even a separate thought. It's how we do business. So that's kind of how I've parsed out the difference between 2 and 3. I'm going to say it one more time. I'll probably say it again, but if that doesn't suit for you and it's more appropriate for you to think about, we either don't have it, we've started it, or we're cruising with it, then feel free to adjust the rubric to meet your needs. Okay, so let's jump in. The way I have the majority of the rest of our slides today is kind of divided into dimension, not kind of, it is divided into dimension with some guiding questions, and then kind of a few strategies for, how do I even know if our organization is doing this or not? So a few strategies to help you think about defining the current landscape, and then the rubric itself. So I'm going to back up to leadership and strategic commitment, and we'll jump in and briefly talk about each dimension in each of these pieces. And again, if you'd like to kind of score yourself as we go, feel free to make a copy of that spreadsheet to kind of track what you're thinking. I put a notes column there too, in case you'd like to make notes of some potential action items or even some data that you might need to go and pull to really identify the current landscape. Okay, so leadership and strategic commitment. I've included just a few of the guiding questions here. The document has a few additional ones. So it really is just, let me scroll down to the first one here, leadership and strategic commitment. It really is just intended to help start the conversation. What do I mean by leadership and strategic commitment? I kind of have a narrative of that. But then the guiding questions are really intended for you internally to spark that conversation about how do we know. And then again, the assessing the current landscape piece is to give you an idea of some data points or some conversations that you need to have internally to really understand what that current landscape is. Okay, back to the slide deck. So, with leadership, we're really thinking about, is it a priority? I mean, are we, internally, is leadership talking about compliance? Are they talking about accessibility at all? And or are they talking about it beyond compliance? Is this a piece of our culture? Do we have resources devoted to it? I'll be honest, at DPI, yes, we have devoted resources to this office of one, but that tells me a story. Yes, we're devoting resources to it, but it's still quite a siloed space. So there's still obviously lots of work to be done, even within my own agency, and certainly even across the state and our school districts. So I would honestly score internally my agency kind of low on my own self-assessment for this, because we really don't have a lot of allocated resources to this. It's an office of one. I don't have a budget. So there's definitely room for growth in this area. Um, and then, thinking about our strategic plans and our mission statement, is it evident? Do we have documentation that's telling the story that this is a commitment? This is a priority for us. So those are some guiding questions. Some strategies that I have for kind of figuring out what our current landscape is would be to do things like checking out our mission and goals, or any reports, or even public facing communications. Is it enough of a commitment that we're seeing that leadership is elevating that in the story that we tell to our users, to our customers, or to our potential customers? Talking obviously with leadership directly, is there a budget allocated? Are we looking to allocate funding for positions, for third party support if we need it? What does that landscape look like, and what kind of resources can we devote to it? And then, kind of along with the first check mark here, are we talking about it? In our team meetings and our product development, throughout our project life cycle, is it part of the discussion? And so, in the self-assessment rubric, you'll see again that from a 0 to 3, where are you on that scale? Do we have any leadership engagement? Is it part of the strategy? Is it really championed across our organization? All right. So we're going to jump into the next dimension. And this is going to be kind of the cadence of the really most of the rest of our conversation this morning. But again, feel free, please, if there's any questions, throw them into the chat, or feel free to unmute, and I'm happy to dig deeper into any of these. All right, so the next one is around risk management. And I'm sure that within your organization, you're already, addressing risks and how to mitigate those. And this is just really a more focused lens into risks related to digital accessibility. So have you identified those? One of the things, and I should have linked to it here, I'll go back and add a link. I do have a document that I've created that, especially for our internally at the agency, at DPI, as well as for our school districts, a risk assessment, that a risk management tool that really has already kind of identified the level of risk for a lot of pieces that I think are relevant to digital accessibility. In fact, let me just see if I can pull that up very quickly. So on my digital accessibility website, which is linked in the slide deck, in procuring accessible digital content, I have a document for risk management. So it might be that as part of your conversation and identifying the current landscape, you take a look at some of these risks and see if you're already in the process of mitigating some of these risks, or even if you're aware of some of these risks. So everything from thinking about, what are the legal and compliance risks that might be associated with accessibility in the space of your company. But things like, what are the risks if we're not engaging users with disabilities to ensure that we're getting feedback from them on the accessibility of our products? So I will link that. I'll leave that tab up so I don't forget to go back and add that to the slide deck as a tool to help you consider this dimension. Do you have a remediation plan for accessibility issues? Oftentimes, well, the majority of the time in any experiences that I've had, especially at the state level, being part of procurement teams, um, I'm finding that a lot of the market, when it comes to digital products, are overall very inaccessible. Now, I know that there are pockets, there are companies out there that are already wholly invested and designed from the beginning for their products to be accessible. But oftentimes, when you don't know what you don't know, I'm finding that as vendors are becoming more aware of the accessibility standards and what they need to do to ensure that they're developing products that are accessible from the beginning, that taking time to and the effort involved to go back and reactively remediate that product can take a ton of resources and honestly human capacity to make those changes. So do you have a plan for that? After when we're recognizing and identifying any accessibility issues that we have, do we have a game plan for how we're going to remediate that? And that's something that we're even talking about internally at my agency, as well as what I'm trying to help our school districts do is inventory, what content do we have, and what's our game plan for fixing content that's not accessible. So the other piece to this is this risk management around accessibility built in to other risk management processes that we have in place. All right, so a few tips for kind of identifying that current landscape. Do you have any accessibility complaints that you can reference? What does that look like? And have those issues been remediated? How is that handled? And then what happens do we already have processes in place for if someone does submit an accessibility issue? What is our process for managing that? Another thing on my digital accessibility website, oh, wrong link, is, let me think of where I have it. I've got so many resources. I have to think about where I have stuff. Oh, here. So on our public school units resources page, I have a section about potential workflows that districts could use to address reported issues. So it might be that when we're talking about planning next week, that this is a process that you might could take and remix to address accessibility issues that are raised by users. So even though obviously I've put that under the resource for school districts, I think a lot of those could absolutely be remixed, even for our suppliers. All right, so on the self-assessment rubric, if you're following along, the score again from 0 to 3 is really thinking about, we've not even thought about the risks that are related to accessibility, all the way to we've got some mitigation plans in place, and we are continually monitoring that and being proactive. Okay. The next one is around roles and responsibilities. And the supervisor who has left me and moved on to another role, my director, who advocated to create this position, I often quote him. He used to say, accessibility is everyone's job, but it also has to be someone's job. And I appreciate that. I think his intent there is to say, we all have, if you are creating, procuring, sharing, developing digital content, then you have a role in accessibility. But it also needs to kind of live in a space with an accessibility champion or a team of champions to help ensure that we are addressing it throughout our organization. So, do you have that in place? I mean, is there already kind of clear ownership and specific responsibilities among your teams or your team members to address accessibility? And are you collaborating? Um, so, the roles and responsibilities document that I shared very briefly in yesterday's webinar is another resource on my website under procurement. And again, I'm trying to make sure that we're really focused today on identifying the current landscape and that we're going to turn our focus to using that information to develop a plan next time. So I didn't link it directly in here, but if you're kind of wondering what would the roles and responsibilities be, what should I even be looking for among my teams, there is a resource for roles and responsibilities on my website that you could kind of start reviewing. But basically, the short of it is, do people know what their roles and responsibilities are? Have we articulated that in any way? And so, that's part of identifying the current landscape. How do we know? Is it part of anyone's job description? Are there any roles that explicitly have, responsibilities related to accessibility? Do we have anyone in development, procurement, customer support? Sales, any of those teams or all of those teams that are already wrapping their arms around the topic of accessibility. And then in the rubric itself, again, absent all the way up to embedded, no roles are defined. We've got some, but it's kind of ad hoc. Or we've already defined those roles, or is it really a collaborative effort across the company that as we're thinking about accessibility, we're already thinking about which teams we need to reach out to in the development of our new product to ensure that everybody is on the same page and that we're getting some user feedback. Okay, moving right along. And I apologize to have to drink on screen, but it's either that or have a coughing fit. All right, so the next one is product and content development. So this was kind of in line with what I was just mentioning with roles and responsibilities. Are we addressing accessibility from the initial brainstorming part of our project development plan all the way through implementation and through updates and iterations of our product? Is it really, no matter what type of project management style you use within your company, how are we embedding accessibility throughout every part of that? Are we, before we released a product or an update, have we done accessibility evaluations? And this is a piece that you're going to see in multiple dimensions today. How are we engaging users with disabilities? Have we tested with them? Are we getting feedback from them? Are we using that to inform any changes that we're making in our development? So a few things that you can do for this. Yesterday we looked at the WAVE tool. WAVE is just one example of an automated tool that can help you do some accessibility checking. It's a browser extension, but it's also, there's functionality right here in the web browser to put in to paste in an address, and maybe this was a page I used to demo in presentations back when the Olympics were going on. I was just getting worried that maybe they had taken this page down. But you can see that on this page, for example, that the automated checker is finding multiple errors, multiple contrast errors. So the text and the background don't have enough contrast. There are some alerts, and generally speaking, alerts will require some sort of human context. So it's going to have to take some sort of manual check. And then it also kind of outlines like the order of the content in the page, which is very important for someone who might be using a keyboard. It also lays out the structure of the page, so the heading structure, and it also actually gives you a contrast checker and helps you identify where any contrast issues are. So it's important to note that automated checkers can catch as little as 10 to 20% of accessibility errors. So it's a great tool. I say it's a great first pass when you're evaluating digital content, but it's important to note that that really shouldn't be considered a full evaluation, because it's going to take some manual checks. Even with the automated checker, there's some warnings that might be noted that will take human context or a human manual evaluation in order to see if it really is an issue. But beyond that, accessibility checkers that are automated can't catch everything, because some of it really is going to require testing with assistive technologies. It's going to require a human to review to see, it can tell me that the heading structure is heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, but I'm going to have to look at that content to see if that heading structure is appropriate to the content that I've put on there. There's an automated checker, at least not yet. AI is an interesting space when it comes to accessibility. I think there's great potential, but at least in the current space of AI tools, it's really not robust enough to replace that manual check. Okay, so checking, running an automated accessibility scan. If you don't have the capacity to do that comprehensively, then at least do some spot checking. One of the things that, and we'll talk about this more, especially in the session where we're diving deep into completing a VPAT, one of the issues that I continually find when I'm working in procurement landscape or procurement teams is that oftentimes accessibility review or reporting is only happening for the main end user. And what I mean by that is, for example, if it's an ed tech product that's mostly student facing, but also has like some reporting features in it for teachers or administrators, which is often the case, especially if the student facing part is interactive, then usually there's some sort of reporting feature on the other side, or there might be an app that corresponds with it for external stakeholders like parents or families. Oftentimes what I find is that the accessibility conformance review, the VPAT or any kind of accessibility documentation, is wholly focused on that main end user, like the students. And while that's important, if you have multiple user interfaces, it's going to be important that you are evaluating accessibility and addressing accessibility through all of those different user interfaces and user roles. So when I say run an automated accessibility scan, be cognizant of that. Make sure that you're looking across the different types of content that you have, your website, your end user product, and all those user interfaces, and of course, any mobile apps that you have. So that's kind of a good litmus test to get an idea of, even with just spot checking, gives you a good idea of really the current landscape, the scope of potentially the scope of the work ahead when it comes to remediation. And definitely manually test a product or web page. I've got some resources on my website that help identify what an automated checker can and can't do, and then also some quick manual checks that you can do. It's not exhaustive, but if this is the first time that you've really been diving deep into accessibility, it'll at least give you a good idea to help you identify the current landscape. And in any internal documentation, do we have anything that has defined what our design standards are, our development standards are when it comes to accessibility? All right, so here's your rubric. Do we consider it at all? Is it a core design principle? And are we really focused on user usability? Honestly, I have no doubt that in your organizations, you are obviously thinking about user profiles. What do our users need? And then you're trying to develop products to meet that need. So my question then in this part of the rubric is accessibility part of that user profile that you're looking at? Okay. Next is QA and evaluation. And this kind of goes along with our previous dimension around content development. But really, this is focused, well, it's very similar, but I tried to kind of separate the two out a little bit to say, how are we providing, how are we doing ongoing evaluation? So do we have a formal accessibility testing process? So previously we were looking at, how does it fit within the full scope of a project or a product development? And here the question is, what does accessibility testing look like, and how often do we do it? So are we including people with disabilities? What is our time frame for evaluations? I know that a lot of vendors, a lot, maybe that's not a fair statement because I can't back that up. I know that many vendors will contract with a third party that has experience and knowledge around accessibility assessments. And I think that's fantastic. I think it's an opportunity for you to get an external, unbiased, view and some evaluation testing of your products. But it's important to note too that it we also need to have internal skills and experience to be able to take that information and then use it to inform what we're doing. Otherwise, we've just contracted for an evaluation and we've ended up with this document, and we can check that off the list of something that's required for a lot of our procurement processes. But if we're not using that information, if we don't understand the results in that evaluation, then we really aren't going to understand how we need to grow. So who's responsible? How often do we do them? And are we fixing what's broken? That's the short of it. So obviously, talk to your QA team. That may be you. If you're in a small company, you may be all of the above, but talk to your QA team. Is it part of how we do business? Is it part of our regular testing? Do we have any tracking mechanisms where we can see how many accessibility issues have been tracked and what we've done about them? And then look back. If you have a collection of VPATs, then let's go back and look and see what progress have we made and where are we still experiencing gaps. All right, so the rubric is no testing or evaluation, or it's embedded throughout. It's happening on a frequent basis. We've got feedback loops happening, and the VPAT itself is not a standalone document. It's part of our work internally for evaluating content. Okay, the next one is communication and documentation. And you'll see that some of these overlap. And in fact, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. If you have any feedback, I told you that you guys are my guinea pigs for rolling out this maturity model. If you have any feedback on the maturity model, the self-assessment, the dimensions, anything, I welcome it. This is intended to support you in your work. And if it's not doing that because of some lack of clarity or some gaps or some need to consolidate some things, then all of this work is a moot point. So I definitely ask you to be a partner in this work. If you have feedback, I welcome it. All right, so for communication and documentation, do you have an accessibility statement? I'll be honest, one of the things that I do when I'm going out and I'm looking at or looking for some sort of digital product or a tool that I can share with others, one of the first things I do is I go look for an accessibility statement. An accessibility statement can vary from, organization type to a different organization type. And of course, through the lens of what is your current landscape and what's our game plan. The intent of an accessibility statement is to tell the story of what is your commitment to accessibility. And I think it's personally, I believe the more transparent, the better. I would rather know up front that you have identified some accessibility issues, and while you haven't remediated all of them, you've got a game plan for how you're going to address them. And you've got a timeline, because that tells me that you are committed to ensuring that you're looking at continuous improvement. So I look for accessibility statements when I go to a website. It's one of the first things I do. Another thing that I do is oftentimes I'll find that a company might have a whole page devoted to digital accessibility. So the first thing I do is do a quick automated evaluation of that page. Because if you've devoted a whole web page to tell me about your commitment to accessibility, and then I do a quick auto evaluation and see that you've got 20 errors on that page, then I'm questioning your true commitment to accessibility. And it might be that accessibility is living in silos in your company, but that in itself tells me at least a part of the story when it comes to if whether or not your company is really devoted to accessibility. And Nicole, I absolutely agree. There needs to be a place for people to submit accessibility issues in many formats. Absolutely. And in fact, if you have a form that is intended for people to be able to submit accessibility issues, but the form is not accessible, then that's again kind of a moot point. We're not really giving them an opportunity to share. And then a statement can help with acknowledging limitations can help too. Yes. And that's the truth. I tell folks, and you'll see one of the final slides I have in today's presentation is that this is about progress over perfection. Absolutely. I want everything to be accessible for all the reasons. It's really just good usability. I mean, when we think about designing for our users, if it's not accessible, then we're really not designing for our users, right? So it's got to be multiple ways that people can submit those issues. And we also have to understand that this is not going to happen overnight. We're not going to be fully accessible overnight. And that goes back to my comment about being transparent. I would rather know that it's on your radar, that you're considering and evaluating not only the compliance of your content, but really evaluating the culture of accessibility within your organization, and know that you're looking ahead to what you're going to, what you're working on and a timeline for that. Then for you to not tell me anything, or to tell me that you think you're accessible when it's evident that you're not. So I personally, I appreciate that level of transparency. I can imagine that that's kind of difficult as a company to air your weaknesses. But I don't think this is that type of space that when we're talking about digital accessibility, it's not going to happen overnight. So let's be as transparent as we can in telling the story of what how we're working towards it. All right. So obviously some things that you can do: review your website. Did I even talk about this? So like end user documentation. Do we have not only mechanisms for people to submit issues, but do we also have like user guides? Because in some instances, for a product to be keyboard accessible, you may have specific keyboard shortcuts that someone needs to be able to use in order to navigate it with a keyboard only. Sometimes that is product specific, but we need to make sure that users understand what those shortcuts are. So ensuring that we have a statement, that we have documentation that's public facing, and that, again, that we're kind of telling that story of where we are and where we want to be. So review your documentation, talk to your customer service teams. How are they addressing accessibility issues when they come in? All right, and so there's your rubric. Documentation, transparent in our current landscape, all the way up to proactively shared information, and that we're given timely updates on our progress. All right, the next one is around procurement and contracting. Again, some of these overlap. This one is really about ensuring that when we're going through a procurement process as a company, are we ensuring that even if our organizations aren't asking for it, are we telling the story about how accessible our products are, or even what our roadmap is for improvement? So I would encourage you to think about the responses that you send for RFPs. Even if it's not, again, highlighted as a requirement or specification in an RFP, I encourage you to tell the story of your accessibility work. When we're talking about contracts, internally, I'm working with our state procurement teams and project managers to say, when we're getting ready to finalize, negotiate a contract, we have got to include some requirements around accessibility. It needs to be clear on who's going to be responsible for the the budget that's involved for any kind of remediation, or and there also needs to be some pieces in place to identify when a product is updated, that these are the testing requirements we expect, and that these are the outcomes that include a potential, a roadmap for fixing any potential issues before rollout, and so on and so on. So I have on my website some sample contracting language that you might want to think about addressing proactively in your contract development, so that you can have that kind of already prepared before you go into negotiations. And then how are you collaborating with customers to meet their needs? And this goes back to the previous dimensions we've been talking about. Are we getting feedback from our users, and to ensure that we are addressing accessibility issues? So again, I said that you're going to see that in kind of multiple dimensions. It's such a key part to this work. If we're not engaging with users with disabilities, then we are making a lot of assumptions that could be very inaccurate. So just because it passed the automated checker and we feel like we've done due diligence for a manual check, we absolutely could still be putting out a product that is not accessible. And one user with a disability is just one user with a disability. So I certainly encourage you to be thinking about how can we engage multiple types of disabled users to get their feedback, and have that inform our project development and our roadmap. Okay, so look at your recent proposals. Do you have anything in there? Do you submit your VPAT with that, or your ACR? Do you address it in contracts? Do you know whose responsibility it's going to be, both human capacity, budget, all of the above, for any accessibility issues within, with your customer? And then again, reach out to sales and customer success teams. Do we have customers asking about accessibility, and how are we answering those questions? So for this rubric part, we're again looking from absent to embedded. Is it fully integrated into procurement and contracts, or are we addressing it at all, or somewhere in between? And much like yesterday, friends, I have not parsed out this hour very well. Yesterday we went over about 6 or 7 minutes, and I can tell the time ticking away that is likely to happen again. So I apologize in advance for not timing this well. I certainly understand if you need to jump off the call in a few minutes. Feel free to check out the recording after the fact. I'll send that in an email, but hopefully you can stay on for a couple more minutes as I wrap up. So we'll kind of jump through the remaining slides a little bit faster. So internal capacity building is really about, are we ensuring that we're providing opportunities for our staff to learn about accessibility? And even more specifically, are we ensuring that they are getting some role-specific training? Because it's likely going to, look different in the training needs of someone who's in procurement versus someone who's in sales. So do we have the training needs met? And then how are we ensuring that that knowledge can be shared across teams? So ask around, is there anyone out there on our team that has some experience with development or uh, accessibility standard, like the WCAG standards? Has anyone been through some training already? And then, of course, look at even things like your onboarding documents. Is this part of the process when we're onboarding a new employee? And of course, your rubric addresses that from 0 to 3. The next one is user engagement and feedback. And I've said this is embedded all throughout, and here's its own dimension. Do we have mechanisms in place to engage with users with disabilities? On my website, I have some resources, some templates already built out for conversations with users with disabilities, agendas so that you can do some focus groups to get some feedback if that's helpful. And then again, how are we tracking any complaints? So look at those feedback channels, talk to our customer success teams, check for user testing data. Do we have any evidence that we've been engaging with users with disabilities? And then our rubric, obviously, from absent to embedded. All right, and this should be our last one. Yes, so continuous improvement is is exactly what it sounds like. Are we tracking progress over time? Go back and look at those old VPATs. Do we have evidence that we're making progress? Is it that and this has happened even internally at my agency, is we've had an Office of Civil Rights complaint about an inaccessible website. And by goodness, we solved that problem. We addressed it. We fixed the issues that were addressed. And the day I found out that we had such a report, I went and looked at those exact pages and there were errors. And that's because we were not building capacity internally. It was a check. We did a one-time fix. And as much as our digital content changes, that's just not going to be a feasible approach to ensuring accessibility. It's going to have to be an ongoing process. So look at how you're doing that. When you're doing product releases, are we addressing it throughout? What processes do we have in place to ensure that we're meeting our compliance goals? All right, and since it's 11 o'clock, I'm going to just briefly mention one more resource. If you are an ed tech vendor, I have been part of, it used to be IMS Global, and now it's One Ed Tech. I was part of the team that helped develop a self-assessment, kind of similar to this. It's a growth model, a self-assessment for education-specific vendors. And so I have linked to some of that information. You do have to be a member of One Ed Tech in order to submit your self-assessment so that ed organizations can come in and see kind of your story of accessibility and where you scored yourself. But you can use the self-assessment internally without being a member of One Ed Tech. You can still access it. So internally with One Ed Tech members, that like as an ed organization, I can go in and see if a vendor has already submitted a self-assessment for accessibility. And this is a screenshot of what that report would look like. Similar maturity scale scoring, kind of an overall score. And I even have a corresponding document that says, that I created that says, okay, so you filled out that self-assessment. What does that mean? What are the implications for an ed organization? What are the implications for a vendor? If they scored themselves low in the area of having accessible, documentation about their accessibility, then what's the next step? And so this corresponding resource goes along with the One Ed Tech rubric. All right, friends. So again, this is about progress over perfection. This will not happen overnight, especially if accessibility is a new part of your organization. That's absolutely fine. Jump in and get started. And hopefully the self-assessment will identify some spaces that you want to focus on. And then, of course, next week we'll dive into the now what, what are we going to do about our identified gaps? And just like if you joined us yesterday, you'll see this picture multiple times if you come to the entire series. I like to just briefly explain my why. This is my daughter, Olivia. She is 20 years old, well, will be 20 years old in a couple of months. And she has multiple disabilities. She's in a wheelchair. She has physical disabilities as well as cognitive disabilities. And we call her our mystery girl because with her autism as one of her disabilities, she will surprise us in, we think she's not taking in information, but then 6 months later, she'll say something that will remind us that she's always paying attention. She's always listening. So my job as a parent and as an educator is to remove as many barriers as I can for her. And digital access has been the game changer for my daughter. It's enabled her to communicate. She can't bend most of her fingers, but boy, she can navigate an iPad like nobody's business, better than anybody I've ever met. And so technology has been the disruptive factor to her success, both as a citizen in society, as well as in her education journey. So she is my why. She is obviously a personal passion to my professional work, and I like to tell that personal story whenever I have a captive audience. All right, so my website is included in the slide deck. Obviously, I've got lots of other resources on there that I encourage you to check out. The webinar series, the rest of the series is listed here. On the 18th, we'll work on that plan. Then we'll talk about an ACR, collaboration, and then if you are an ed tech vendor, I encourage you to join the one on April the 8th, where we will dive even deeper into some specifics around accessibility for student content. Okay, that's it, friends. Thank you so much again for hey, if you're joining any of the other webinars, I would encourage you, if you can, to go ahead and book out an additional 10 minutes or so, because obviously I'm having a tough time staying within our hour time frame. So thanks everybody for joining. I'll stay on for a minute if anybody has any questions, and I hope to see you at the next one.
No questions, Donna. Thanks again for a really great informative session. And as a team of one, if you ever looking for a thought partner, this is Nicole. I'd love to chat more with you. You have great resources. Thank you.